What's up, babe? It's Alex or Black Eye here. I've decided to start calling my subscribers babe, as that's pretty much how I refer to everybody that chats in my live stream. So subscribe if you want to be my babe. Anyways, I have every single god diamond. In other words, I'm a fucking loser. I feel like I have a decent understanding of every god in the game, and I often discuss with my live stream viewers about how difficult or not difficult a god is to play. So today, I'm just going to give my opinion on who I think the top 3 easiest gods are to play in every single class. I feel kind of bad because I tweeted about this asking for other people's opinions and forgot to specify that this takes into account game modes other than Conquest. If this video was about Conquest specifically, then the list would change pretty drastically, especially for ADC and solo. This list also isn't going to take into account how good or bad a god is in the current meta, and will more focus on their core gameplay and mechanics. The gods I discuss also aren't in any particular order, so the first god I discuss I don't think is necessarily easier than the last god, and vice versa. I'm pretty much going into this thinking, if I'm a new player, which god would I find the easiest to play? With those technicalities out of the way, let's begin. Let's start with assassins, specifically with Arachne. Arachne is just really simple, and arguably really good against lower skilled players. Her entire kit is about hitting melee auto attacks, which isn't too difficult. In fact, I'd argue the most difficult part about Arachne is knowing when and when not to go in, and this isn't really hard to get a grasp of either once you've played a couple of games on her. Even when you do figure out when to engage, her combo is really simple. You literally just press 3-1-2, and her third ability is extremely wide, so it's hard to miss. Also, if you go blink, you can use that as an initiate and then use your ultimate as a get out of jail free card. Next up under the assassins, we have Bakasura. Similar to Arachne, he is entirely melee auto attack focused, which again just isn't hard to hit. Also similar to Arachne, I'd argue the most difficult part is knowing when and when not to go in. And in most scenarios, you just go in whenever your ultimate is up. You don't even need to use your leap to initiate either if you have blink. Once you figure out how to either wait out the enemy's escape or simply bait it out, then you pretty much mastered Bakasura. He also just has built-in sustain with his 2, as well as having a leap. So in some cases, you can just get away with positioning poorly. Bakasura is literally pressing 4 and then 3 and attacking until someone dies or you're low HP. He's not difficult. Finally, for the assassins, we have Fenrir. I actually spent like 5 to 10 minutes debating between Hunbats and Fenrir, but I think Fenrir is slightly easier than Hunbats. Fenrir's kit involves hitting your first and third ability, which really isn't that difficult. Against newer players, hitting both of these will either get you a kill or force them to recall to base. The stun on his first ability will also just secure your third ability or ultimate, so you sometimes don't even have to aim them. His second ability doesn't require any thought, just use it before the rest of your kit. I suppose managing his runes might be difficult to some, but if you are farming correctly, then you should have full runes up in almost any engagement. I think the most difficult part of Fenrir is knowing when to cancel your third ability as to not bait yourself, or just avoid other abilities. He's also extremely safe and quite literally has 3 forms of an escape, so you can get away with not positioning correctly too against certain players. Overall, Fenrir is just fairly simple and extremely safe. Moving on to the Guardians. First up, we have Bacchus. I put Bacchus here because I think he's one of the safer Guardians that also has above average damage relative to the other Guardians. He has built-in magical power and damage mitigation from his passive, as well as built-in protections from his first ability. I know some newer players are turned off because of the Drunko meter, but once you know to just spam his first ability relatively off cooldown, you're golden, especially since it's such low mana at 20 mana per cast. His second and third ability are extremely straightforward and can both be used to engage in peel, and the flop isn't even a skill shot sometimes because if you start with the burp, you can follow up off the stun with your flop, which doesn't require any aiming. Finally, his ultimate is pretty much always used to either secure a kill or disrupt multiple enemies at once. Pretty much all you need to do on Bacchus is figure out whether you want to use your kit for damage or peel, and once you do that, he's extremely straightforward. Next up, we have Kumbakarna. I truly believe Kumbakarna is a contender for the easiest god in the entire game. There literally isn't much to explain about Kumba. His first ability can be used for damage or an escape. His 2 is pretty much only used to set up for your team or just do a bit of damage early. His 3 is a big AoE mesmerize that you can't really miss, and his ultimate can be used for damage, peel, as well as avoid crowd control since it is CC immune. I guess the hardest part of Kumbakarna is knowing that you can dash into a minion and turn before hitting the minion to change the direction the minion will go, but this is only useful in very, very niche scenarios. Kumbakarna is just one of those gods that you have to try to fuck up when playing. Finally, in the Guardians, we have Jing Chen. This is my personal favorite Guardian, who just happens to be extremely easy. Once again, his kit is just extremely straightforward and is good at both dealing damage and peeling for your team. Funny enough, I think his first ability is the most difficult part to understand, mainly because it's the only skill shot in his kit and sometimes people forget you can use it to decrease basic attack damage. Other than that, his second ability is really hard to miss. His third ability gives you 2 chances to dodge other abilities since you are untargetable while in the air. And his ultimate can both be used to set up kills for your team and peel for your team. Like I said earlier, the hardest part is just hitting your first ability in fast-paced situations and figuring out whether to peel or deal damage, which isn't really that difficult. Moving on to Hunters. This is one of the harder classes to choose a top 3 from, mainly because so many of the Hunters are so simple to learn and understand. But first up, we have Neath. You guys probably saw this one coming. Neath is the first character you're introduced to in SMITE, and for a good reason. She has a little bit of everything: burst damage, sustain, an escape, and some decent crowd control. Your first ability hits like a truck if built correctly, although it is a skill shot. But sometimes when one of your weaves is on the ground, you don't even have to aim the first ability. Her second ability gives you sustain and helps with boxing since it reduces attack speed, and her third ability is just a traditional escape. In a lot of cases, you don't even need to turn when casting the backflip because it, well, literally goes backwards. Her ultimate is also unmissable unless you're weakened.
Really? Where the fuck did my ult go?
Overall, Neath is just pretty good at everything. Just please, for the love of God, don't backflip the wave or an enemy, then immediately walk back up. I see people do this in my Masters ranked lobbies, and then they just die because they don't have their backflip. Next up, we have Cupid. This is going to be very biased, but I fucking hate Cupid. He's a stupid, dumb baby that doesn't pay his taxes. He has 2 things that requires aiming: his first ability and his auto attacks. But I'd argue half the time you just follow up friendly crowd control with his heart bomb, so you don't even really need to aim it all the time. Hell, even when you use your ultimate, it slows them, which makes it easier to hit your first ability. He's got a heal, passive attack speed, and an ultimate that is just extremely hard to miss. I've always said that Cupid is one of the I don't know how to play ADC hunters. Fuck Cupid. All the homies hate Cupid. Finally, we have Gibraltar. Might be controversial, as this entire video probably is, but I think Gibraltar is the easiest hunter to play in the entire game. The most difficult part of him is managing your mana, and all you need to alleviate that is just build Transcendence. Other than that, he has a slow, a CC immune dash, enhanced autos, and an unmissable ultimate. If you know you can safely use your dash for poke, then combining both your second ability with your third ability will do a sneaky amount of damage. It's also hard to miss the 2 and the 3. You do need a little bit of map awareness to know when to use your ultimate when you aren't in a team fight, but this really only applies in Conquest. In other modes, you are fighting with your team the majority of the game, and I don't think it's hard to understand that you just press his ultimate in the middle of fighting. Moving on to mages, which is another tough category to rank gods by difficulty because there are just so many fucking mages. But first up, let's talk about Hades. I feel like Hades is one of the few gods where there isn't much decision making when playing him. He's extremely straightforward. You do the exact same combo in every single fight aside from a few niche scenarios. You make sure enemies are blighted, you press 2, then 3, and sometimes you don't even need the enemies to be blighted. His self-peel is also above average. I get his escape isn't the greatest, but at least it can go over walls, and you can also use your 2 to interrupt abilities. Finally, his ultimate is also extremely straightforward. In 1v1s, you use it when somebody's escape is down or if they don't have one, and in team fights, you just use it to group everyone up, which either forces relics or gives your team kills. I know I said in the beginning I wouldn't take how good they are in the current meta into account, but for pretty much every single patch, Hades is always in the top 5 highest win rate. And I think a big reason for that is because he's both good and extremely easy to play. Next up, we have Poseidon. Outside of sustain and a traditional escape, Poseidon has a little bit of everything: burst damage, movement speed, enhanced autos, self-peel, and decent crowd control. He also excels at either one-shotting squishy targets or baiting out relics with his ultimate. So even if they use Aegis against your ultimate, that makes it easier for your team to kill them instead. Speaking of his ultimate, it's hard to truly miss it since it's so big. I don't expect people to hit people in the center every single time, but at least the outer circle is so big that even if you quote miss the ability, it'll still deal a decent bit of damage. His self-peel is also above average, especially against auto attack characters. His 3 is a vortex and a cripple, which can be very powerful, and his 1 literally pushes people away from him. It takes some time to get used to when combining his 3 with his ultimate, but overall this god isn't too difficult to pick up. Finally, we have Ra, another starting character that is also extremely easy to play. He's got 2 lines and 2 circles. Come the fuck on, man. Ra has burst damage, sustain, a little bit of CC, even some protections built in with his 3. Similar to Poseidon, while he doesn't have a traditional escape, he's got movement speed built into his passive, so he's just naturally faster than other gods. Even if you get poked out by enemy abilities, you have a heal which you can drop to mitigate the positioning errors. It's also worth noting that if you build some cooldown, your ultimate is on an extremely low cooldown towards the late game. The only truly difficult thing about Ra that I can think of is free casting both his 1 and his ultimate on the same god for an insane amount of burst damage. Speaking of combining his 1 and his ultimate, that also allows him to have very good secure on objectives, such as Gold Fury, Apophis, Fire Giant, Bull Demon King, or whatever. Finally, we have the warrior class, and the first god we gotta talk about is Chalk. In SMITE, he's considered the god of rain, but I consider him the god of circles. Literally every single ability is a circle. Circles, especially big ones, are not too hard to hit. Also, newer players that are just unaware of his damage will get demolished by him, with some Chalk players opting to build a little damage on him because of this. Other than that, he's got above average 1v1 potential, above average sustain, and can easily bully mages and hunters. The hardest part about Chalk is knowing what to follow up your 1 with, as your 2 will teleport you to the axe and your 3 will give you a large slow field. Even then, it's not too hard to figure out which is better in whatever scenario you're in. I think his skill ceiling is slightly higher than other warriors, but overall it's really not hard to pick up Chalk and find success. Next up we have Nike. Nike used to be a contender for one of the easiest characters in SMITE until the rework to her second ability. I feel like most people don't think about her passive and just understand that you'll get free power and movement speed at some point in the game. Her first ability is very wide and hard to miss, her second ability is just silly, and her third ability is a standard leap and knockup. Finally, her ultimate is simply a second health bar paired with damage and a giant slow. There really isn't much to say about Nike. You go in, you do damage, and if you get in trouble, you press your ultimate. Very simple. Finally, we have Vamana. Okay, I understand Vamana is usually pretty dog shit, but if you don't take that into account, he's actually not hard to play. He's got a pretty standard dash, his 2 is quite literally a giant cone that only does damage, and his 3 is just a standard line that damages and slows. His ultimate both turns you into a raid boss and also functions as a get out of jail free card. It can literally go through player made walls as well. Personally, I find it kinda hard to hit his 3 because I just think it's kinda awkward, but I think the hardest part about him is using his 1 for the knockup and canceling it. Newer players might find that a little bit difficult. If I were to make a guide on how to play Vamana, I would just say that if they don't have a cursed Ankh, then you're allowed to have fun, and if they do have a cursed Ankh, then you aren't allowed to have fun. Pretty simple. Thank you guys for watching, and I know everyone won't agree with me, so feel free to leave your opinions in the comments. I just think topics like these are really fun to discuss. I haven't made a video like this before, so if you want to see more or just have another suggestion of a video that I should make, then please leave a comment. Thank you, babe, for watching. This has been Black Eye, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh, shit. All day, pray them niggas go.